So we're going to begin section 1.3 by looking at two definitions. The first thing that we're going to define is what's called absolute change. So absolute change is the difference between two numbers. Finding it is very easy. All we have to do is subtract the two numbers, and we want to remember that absolute change should always be positive. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. We're going to take a look at our example. We have a table of values, and we want to fill in right now the column for absolute change. All right, so remember, absolute change is subtracting the two numbers that were given and keeping in mind that it always has to be positive. All right, so for part A, we would take our original amount of 450 and our new amount of 500. And it does not matter in what order you subtract them in. So if you want to do 450 minus 500, that's fine. Or if you want to do 500 minus 450, that's fine. Now, if you put these in your calculator, the 450 minus 500, your calculator is going to give you a negative 50. And the 500 minus 450, your calculator is going to give you a positive 50. Remember, absolute change has to be positive. So even if your calculator gives you a negative, you're still going to enter the positive value for your absolute change. Okay, so you don't want to get hung up on which order you need to subtract them in. It really doesn't matter. Subtract them, and if your calculator gives you a negative answer, then just remember that it needs to be positive when you write it in for your answer for absolute change. All right, so the second one, we're going to say 500 minus 450, the same two numbers, will also be 50. The third one, we'll do 25 minus 12. All right, and you can do that on your calculator. 25 minus 12 is going to be 13. The next one, we're going to do 25 minus 3712, or in the other order. Again, it doesn't matter. Just subtract the two numbers. We'll get 1187. For part E, I'm going to say 2789.80 minus 2584.96. That's going to give me an answer of 204.84. Now, this last one, I want to take just a second with, because I know that a lot of times that we're not very comfortable with fractions, and we need to have a way to address a problem like this where we need to subtract those fractions. I think perhaps the easiest thing to do is to convert those fractions to decimals and then subtract our decimals. So on my calculator, I'm going to do 9, and then I'm going to press my divided by key, and 16. And then I'm going to jot down the decimal that I get. So that gives me 0.5625. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the 3 divided by 8. So the 3 goes in first in my calculator, and then I'm going to divide by 8. And that's going to give me 0.375. So now in order to find my absolute change, I'm going to subtract these two decimal values. So 0.5625 minus 0.375. And I'm going to jot my answer down, 0.1875. Okay, so that takes care of the absolute change. Remember that absolute change is always positive, so we have positive numbers all the way down that column. Okay, so the next column is asking us for percent change. So let me go back and show you a formula that we're going to use for percent change. Percent change is found by taking the absolute change and dividing it by the original amount. and then multiplying by 100. Okay, so absolute change divided by the original amount and then multiply by 100. So I'm just going to write that up here just so that we don't forget. We're going to take the absolute, we're going to divide it by the original, and we're going to multiply by 100. Okay, so let's see if we can work through these. So for the first one, the absolute change was 50. The original amount was 450. And then we're going to multiply by 100. Okay, so we're going to type it in our calculator. We're going to do 50 divided by 450 times 100. All right, and we're going to round these things. Let's round to 2 decimal places. So on this one, I would have 11.11%. All right, for the next one, we're going to take our absolute change, which is 50, and we're going to divide by the original amount, which was 500. So I've got 50 on the top still, and I'm now going to put 500 on the bottom, and we'll work that out. So 50 divided by 500 times 100 gives me 10%. All right, for our next one, for part C, we're going to have an absolute change of 13, an original amount of 25. So 13 divided by 25 times 100 gives me 52%. Okay, for part D, our absolute change is 1187. Our original amount was 2525. And we're multiplying by 100. So 1187 divided by 2525 times 100 is going to give me 47. And again, let's do 2 decimal places. So 47.01%. All right, so for part E, we're going to take our absolute change, which is 204.84. We're going to divide by the original amount, which was 2789.80. And we're going to multiply by 100. So 204.84 divided by 2789.8 and multiplied by 100 gives me 7.34%. All right, and our last one, our absolute change is 1875 or 0.1875. Our original amount was 9/16, which we said was 0.5625. So again, let's use those decimals. And then we're going to multiply by 100. So 0.1875 divided by 0.5625 times 100 gives me 33.33%. Now, the last thing that we want to do is we want to talk about whether that percent change is an increase or a decrease. And in order to do that, we're basically going to look back at our original amount versus our new amount. All right, so on part A, our original amount was $450. It changed to $500. So that is an increase. On part B, we started at $500 and we went to $450. That's a decrease. We're going down. For part C, we started at 25 and we went to 12. Also a decrease. For part D, we started at 25.25. We went up to 37.12. So that's an increase. On part E, 2789.8, and then we went to 2584, so we went down, we decreased. All right, and then 9/16 to 3/8, so we started at 56.25, and then we went to 37.5, or 0.375, so that again is a decrease. All right, so in conclusion, you would want to be able to find your absolute change by subtracting, remembering that that's always positive. You want to be able to calculate your percent change by taking the absolute change and dividing by the original. And then you want to be able to talk about whether that percent change is an increase or a decrease.